succumbed to this disease. By contrast, at a similar stage in the progression of the disease, countries such as the United States have recorded more than 50,000 deceased. United Kingdom and American Samoa, we should never forget that the importance of the lockdown was to delay the spread of the virus and prevent the dissemination of the infection. So far, we have been successful in a method which duty as another option, which is demonstrated in the American context. My message to American and global witnesses is the percentage of cases detected now are reported as as low as the positivity rate has remained at a low and steady level. The third infections in South Africa is about 181 people dead, 2 million of them English. But countries such as the United States and many Australian countries have been between 2,400 and 4,600 coronavirus cases per million people. It is significant that out of the 12,074 confirmed cases in South Africa, we have recorded 4,745 people who have recovered. By delaying the spread of the disease, we've been able to strengthen the capacity of our health system and to put in place wide-ranging protective improvements to better manage or eliminate infections. We now have nearly 21,000 additional beds available for quarantine, additional to the beds we already have. We've been able to source and produce substantial quantities of personal protective equipment for health workers, vital medical equipment, and other supplies.
Ah,
But we still need more. Using the vulnerable time which the lockdown permits, we have managed to significantly expand our screening and our testing. For our third wave, we have now screened over 9 million people and we have collected nearly 370,000 coronavirus tests. This is the largest and most extensive public health mobilization in the history of our country. It has been made possible by the hard work and dedication of thousands of community members, nurses, doctors, and other health workers. We have made enormous sacrifices to ensure the success of our lockdown. By answering the call to stay at home and stay safe, you, the people of South Africa, have helped all of us to save many lives. As we have strengthened our public health response, we have introduced several vital measures to support the companies, the workers, and the households that have been severely affected by the lockdown. We have introduced an economic and social relief package worth over 500 billion rand to help companies in distress, to save jobs, and to provide some income to informal workers and poor households. our most vulnerable citizens are supported and protected during this difficult time. The scale of the measures we have taken, including tax relief and interventions by the South African Reserve Bank, is quite historic. The Solidarity Fund, which was set up to support the coronavirus response, has raised around 2.7 billion rand in commitments from over 175,000 individuals and more than 1,500 companies and foundations. We are grateful to the many governments and organizations that continue to generously support our coronavirus response. In addition to those that I have previously recognized, I wish to express our appreciation to the government and the people of the United States for the donation of 1,000 ventilators. I also want to recognize the commitment of the Elma Group of Foundations of 2 billion rand to mitigate the impact of coronavirus on vulnerable communities in Africa, our continent. This includes an immediate contribution of 250 million rand to South Africa's Solidarity Fund. We are determined that our response matches the proportions of the crisis and helps to ensure that the foundations of our economy are protected. There have been very disturbing reports of increased levels of gender-based violence since the lockdown started. The scourge of gender-based violence continues to stalk our country as the men of our country have declared war on the women of South Africa. We have developed an emergency pathway for survivors to ensure that the victims of gender-based violence are assisted. One of the interventions we have made is to ensure lockdown regulations to be structured in a manner that a woman can leave her home to report abuse without the fear of a fine, intimidation, or further violence. Now, 2 months after we declared a national state of disaster, we are ready to shift to a new phase in our response to the coronavirus pandemic. On the 1st of May, we moved to alert level 4 from level 5 and began the phased easing of the national lockdown. This was in line with our risk-adjusted strategy, through which we sought to slow down the rate of infection and flatten the curve. We are now preparing for a further easing of the lockdown and a gradual opening of our economy. I will repeat what I have said before. If we lift the lockdown too abruptly and too quickly, we risk a rapid and unmanageable surge in infections. We will therefore continue to proceed cautiously, informed by the best available evidence and guided by the advice of local and international experts, but also in observing the experiences of other nations. Our goal is to steadily increase economic activity while putting measures in place to reduce the transmission of the virus and provide adequate care for those who become infected and need treatment. When I last addressed you, I outlined the 5-level alert system that we have introduced to guide this process. At the time, the country was at level 5, as I said, which has the most stringent restrictions on movement of people and economic activity.
Home arrest.
Alert level 4, which is the current level across the country,
Not much different.
retains most of the lockdown regulations but permits the gradual opening up of certain parts of the economy.
Which parts?
Alert level 3 to 1 allow progressively greater relaxation of restrictions. As I indicated then, some areas of the country may be designated at a particular alert level, while others may be designated at another level. This would be done according to the rate of infection in an area and the state of readiness and the capacity of its health facilities to cope with treating infected people. For now, infections are mostly concentrated in a few metropolitan municipalities and districts in our country.
And the townships?
It is important that we maintain stringent restrictions in those areas and restrict travel out of these areas to other parts of the country with lower rates of infection. We will immediately begin a process of consultation with relevant stakeholders on the proposal that by the end of May, most of the country should be placed on alert level 3, but that those parts of the country with the highest rates of infection remain on level 4.
The Western Cape.
We will make further announcements in this regard after the completion of the consultations we will have. In the coming days, we will also be announcing certain changes to level 4 regulations to expand permitted business activities in a number of sectors in the retail, in the e-commerce, and reduce restrictions also on exercise. Some of our people have questioned whether our approach in dealing with the coronavirus has been at the expense of the livelihood of our people.
The ones you call enemies of the state.
Our strategic approach has been based on saving lives and preserving livelihoods.
No, only one side of the equation, my friend.
Our key objective has always been to slow down the infection rate through a number of interventions in our coronavirus prevention toolbox.
We'll buy that, slow the infection rate down.
Each of these prevention measures are crucial and are non-negotiable. They being, 1, a lockdown. Lockdown which is meant to achieve extreme social distancing.
That's right, Sean,
which we have been on. Second one is social distancing itself. The third, adopting hand hygiene practices by washing hands regularly with water and soap or sanitizer.
So you have to teach people
Professor
how to be clean?
told me that this has been the tried and tested method for over 150 years. Fourth one is the cough etiquette, including coughing into your elbow, like I showed the last time, or a tissue. The next one would be wearing cloth masks.
Can you believe a head of state tells us this?
Whenever you are in public spaces like this and wearing it properly. The next one is the use of personal protection equipment by all our health workers. The next one is frequent cleaning of the work environment and other public spaces. And may I add here, it should also include the cleaning of our living environment as well. Good hygiene. The next one is symptom screening. The next one is testing, isolation, quarantine, and contact tracing. It is in the implementation of all these preventative measures that we will overcome this disease. The success of our efforts to limit transmission of the virus depends on finding those who are infected as early as possible, tracing their contacts or those they've been in contact with, and isolating them so they cannot pass on the virus to others. Our door-to-door screening campaign in vulnerable communities across the country has resulted in over 100,000 people being referred for testing. This gave us a good indication of the extent of the infection amongst our people, but we now need a screening and testing program that is targeted to areas where people are more likely to be infected.
That is targeted.
This will involve the identification of infection hotspots using a combination of technology, surveillance data, and the epidemiological mapping, enabling the rapid deployment of dedicated screening and testing teams to those areas. Those found to be positive should either self-isolate or be isolated in suitable and independently inspected facilities.
Leper colonies, perhaps?
Most importantly, this new phase will require each of us to change our own behavior in profound ways. There needs to be a fundamental shift in our thinking and our way of life. We need to take personal responsibility for our own health and the health of others. Let us remember that although the lockdown has slowed down the rate of transmission, the virus is very much still present and will be present amongst us for a long time to come.
We got the sign language finally.
We have been warned that infections will inevitably rise as the lockdown measures are eased, as has happened in many other countries. We also know that the coronavirus will continue to be a global health threat for some time to come, and that the fight against COVID-19 needs to become part of our daily lives. Our success in overcoming the virus will ultimately be determined by the changes we make in our behavior, by the changes we make in how we move around, by the changes we make in our personal interactions, by changes we make where if you go into a mall, you must expect that at the door they will give you a sanitizer. They'll be sanitizing so that you can clean your hands. The hugging and shaking of hands and kissing is a thing of the past. As restrictions are eased, we will need to observe social distancing even more carefully. Yes, wear our face masks whenever we leave home, wash hands regularly with soap and water or sanitizer, and avoid contact with other people. I've been encouraged that so many people are wearing face masks in public since the start of Alert 4. I went walking this morning, and the many people that I saw in the street were wearing their face masks.
And you?
And it was then that I really realized that South Africans have taken the message of wearing face masks seriously. I was really encouraged.
And the evidence to support wearing
them? We will need to reorganize our workplaces, our schools,
where nobody has
our
a job,
universities, our colleges, and other public spaces to limit transmission. We will need to adapt to new ways of worshiping. of socializing, of exercising, and also of meetings. And this will minimize the opportunities for the virus to spread. It is our actions now that will determine whether the advantage we gained through the lockdown can be sustained. It is our actions now, individually and together, that will determine whether the great sacrifices that people have made over these last 2 months will ultimately save the lives of thousands of South Africans and spare our country from the huge devastation that this pandemic can cause. The transition to the next phase of the coronavirus response will in many ways be more difficult than the present one. The risk of infection outbreaks will increase as more people return to work. This calls for vigilance, responsibility, and discipline from all of us. My fellow South Africans, over the last 7 weeks, you have been asked to endure much and to sacrifice much. On more than one occasion, I have stood before you and asked you to accept stringent restrictions on your daily lives, knowing that these will bring great hardship. You have heeded these calls, firmly convinced that these measures are necessary for the health and the well-being and indeed the survival of each one of us. In return for everything that is being asked of you, there are a few fundamental things that you ask of us, your leaders. And that is why we must acknowledge that as we have confronted this unprecedented challenge, there may have been times when we have fallen short of your expectations. Some of the actions we have taken have been unclear, some have been contradictory, and some have been poorly explained, and some have evoked a lot of anger and opposition in all of you, in many of you rather. Implementation has sometimes been slow, and enforcement has sometimes been inconsistent and too harsh. This evening, I want to reaffirm my commitment and the commitment of the government that I lead to take whatever action is necessary to safeguard the life, the dignity, and the interests of the people of our country. The last time I addressed you, I said that we will soon be embarking on the third phase of our economic response to the coronavirus crisis by outlining a clear strategy for economic recovery. Cabinet is seized with this issue and will be announcing the outcome of what we are discussing when we have completed our work. We are determined and committed to ensure that all government decisions are taken in good faith, that they are reasonable and rational and are based on empirical evidence, and that they do not cause much harm than good.
If only that were true. Also, that's true.
We're committed to be transparent, to take the nation into confidence,
confidence.
and to transparently be able to impart information to the people of this country.
By appearing once every 3 weeks.
To continue to be forthright on the state of the pandemic. You want to know when things are bad.
We know things are
and
bad.
You want to be told when they could get worse.
They are worse.
We are committed to continue to engage and to consult with you.
Really?
We are, after all, a consultative government.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
We're also committed to ensure that we continue to mobilize every resource at our disposal to support the most vulnerable and to give the greatest support to those most in need. And we are also committed to make sure that the funds that are dedicated to our coronavirus response are not wasted and that they are not stolen. Above all, I pledge once again to ensure that your rights are respected and upheld, and especially those who have been entrusted with this responsibility. As your president, as this government, we are firmly committed to meeting the expectations you rightly expect of us. Where we have disappointed, we will continue to make amends. Where we have made mistakes, and as I said, we are traversing uncharted territory. None of us has ever been through what we are going through now in the history of this country. We will make mistakes, but I can assure you we will always seek to correct those mistakes. Our collective struggles over the past months have taught us much about ourselves and about each other. We have also learned a lot about this virus. Although there may have been differences and disagreements, there have also been amazing levels of kindness, of empathy, and compassion that has been demonstrated by many South Africans across the length and the breadth of our country. There has been courage and solidarity like we have never seen before. A very different South Africa and world awaits us. The greatest test will be our willingness to embrace change. We are now required to rise to meet this challenge. We need to stand as one family and one nation to build a new and stronger society and a stronger South Africa. The days before us will be difficult, but we will draw strength from what we have already achieved. And this challenge that we're facing now has presented us with enormous difficulties, but we are making progress and we are achieving some good results.
The destruction of South African society.
We should recall the words spoken by the father of our nation, Nelson Mandela, 20 years ago, when our country was being devastated by another pandemic. He said, in the face of the grave threat posed by HIV/AIDS, we have to rise above our differences and combine our efforts to save our people. He continued to say, history will judge us harshly if we fail to do so now. As I end, let me offer the words of another leader who had to confront another difficult challenge, which was the Second World War and the Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He delivered some words at a difficult time in the life of his own country. The state of this nation, he said, is good. The heart of this nation is sound. The spirit of this nation is strong. The faith of this nation is eternal. Close quotes. May God bless South Africa and protect her people. I thank you. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, folks. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Wow. Well, welcome those tuning in to my sudden live stream here as I decided to Tune in, after all, to President Ramaphosa's sudden appearance. We had a Puxatawny Ramaphosa sighting today when President Cyril Ramaphosa made a rare appearance from his luxurious home located in the hills of Pretoria to address the nation for the first time in 3 weeks. It's Groundhog Day in South Africa, folks. Welcome aboard. This is Chris here from central Pennsylvania. Well, it's time for tonight's special on the menu. We've run out of kudu, so our special tonight is Roast Cyril. Well, please jump in the chat there, folks, and let's hear what you've got to say, your questions and comments. For those of you jumping over from Ronaldo or, say, from Roman's channel, which had thousands of folks on there, it's impossible to do any chat on there. You get a chance to get in here. Much smaller crowd here, so let's talk about it. Is anybody else a bit surprised that we actually saw Cyril Ramaphosa? I was wondering if President NDC, I'm sorry, the Minister for Cooperative Affairs and whatever that ministry she runs, I was surprised that she and the ANC allowed him to go on the stage there. But I think the greatest line here is, we are, after all, a consultative government. Seriously, is he rolling the papers? What is in the Zal that Cyril Ramaphosa is smoking? A consultative government? Yes, they go through the steps, they check the block, and they take all the things like consultative process. We ask the public, we listen to the public, we heard what they had to say, and then they do exactly the opposite of what the public asked them to do. Virtually no one in the public is asking for a ban on cigarette sales, yet you still have a ban on cigarette sales. The vast majority of the country is screaming for relief from this lockdown. Interesting to say that their measures have made a difference. Well, perhaps they have. And perhaps they have saved lives, people not dying from COVID-19. But how many lives have been lost to suicide, depression, people unable to move about and get to their treatment for normal medical follow-through on medical appointments for medical conditions? How many people suffer from that? These are the questions. So William says, I did predict this. The ANC will get as much power as they can from the virus. Yes, I would agree with you, William. Rion, welcome there. No school, King Dog said. Yeah, no mention of school. What's going on with that? So here in the States, we have people talking about kids staying out of school because Dr. Fauci is talking about closing schools an entire year beyond this. I don't know what this guy's smoking here, but he's apparently getting the same Zal products that Cyril Ramaphosa is getting, Dr. Fauci here in the U.S. Closing school for another year. Now, that's a non-starter. That's a non-starter. Even if you don't intend to reopen the physical schools, you must find a way to deploy a methodology, a means so that people can actually get their kids educated. Most people aren't talented or responsible enough to do homeschooling, and so those kids are going to suffer. This is just insane, folks. So, King Franklin, yeah, I mentioned King Franklin here. It's absolutely insane here. So give me your thoughts if you've got any questions or comments about Cyril Ramaphosa's sudden appearance today after 3 weeks, in which he talked about how they are transparent and how the ANC government shares information so that the public knows. What is he talking about? Has he been in South Africa for the last 3 weeks in the vacuum, the total absence of information from the government? We get more information from people with their mobile phones taking photographs of police arresting toddlers or octogenarians on the beach who are walking around than we get from the government of South Africa. Now, here in the U.S., we get plenty of information each and every day from our government, whether it's at the state level. Here in Pennsylvania, we get a briefing every afternoon at noontime from the state of Pennsylvania. We get briefings every day from the Corona Task Force at the White House, which includes members of the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, and the executive branch. We get that briefing all the time, but folks, they also are giving us lots of incorrect information as they go through this process of discovering and dealing with the virus. But we haven't gotten much in the way of information from the government of South Africa, or from the government of Botswana, or Zimbabwe, or Zambia, any of the countries in the region. By the way, did anyone else see this? I got a message earlier that said that the first confirmed case of coronavirus has been identified in Lesotho. Just days after Prime Minister Tom Tabane warned that people slipping into the country illegally, getting around border posts, was posing a threat to Lesotho with people coming in from South Africa. Now, whether that's what happened or not, it really isn't germane. Tom Tabane is trying to save his job and to not go to prison for the murder of his ex-wife, which his current wife is charged and suspected of having committed, having had her bumped off. Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. It's like an episode of Dynasty. You really can't make those things up. Or anyway, so Yeah, nothing has changed. Yeah, right, exactly, Riyadh. So what was the point of coming on other than to show that Ramaphosa is still alive? Unlike Kim Jong Un, we know he's alive. We've actually seen him now on television, and he's still babbling the same nonsense from his prepared script with no emotion, with the drive and verve of an automaton. It's like watching the Daleks. We are transparent. We are opaque. We are the ANC, a consultative government. Cyril Ramaphosa is not only is he Puxatani Ramaphosa, but perhaps he's also a Dalek in disguise, and we never knew it. We never knew it. Exterminate, exterminate. We will exterminate South Africa's economy. We will repopulate. We will destroy. It's like the Daleks, man. Seriously. I ought to do a video about Dalek Ramaphosa. That would be a good one, I think. Anyway, William says, what's he? Hi, Jane Liebenberg. Welcome. Ramaphosa lives in La La Land, brutal police beatings and military beatings not reported. Yeah, where's the no discussion about the security services and the abuses taking place? Yes, yes, as a soldier and a veteran, I don't automatically defer to attacking law enforcement or the military. No, 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 no. But you don't ignore the abuses that are taking place. Seriously, is this for real? I mean, you have to shake your head. To shake your head about this. Yeah, no discussion of that whatsoever, Jane. It's distressing to see that there was no mention of this whatsoever by Ramaphosa. I mean, he basically took the same speech that he had 3 weeks ago and he threw in level 5 to level 4, and that was it. And all this nonsense about being opaque. Not a single mention of discussion about South Africans being banned from purchasing clothing. Now, how do you ban people from buying clothes? What are we, Neanderthals? Are we Homo habilis? Are we Homo naledi? Are we people from 200,000 years ago? The primordial Homo sapiens? We can't buy undergarments? Yes, we can buy undergarments, but we can't buy bikinis in South Africa. Now, fortunately, I don't wear a bikini, so that's not an issue. But that raises the question, as I mentioned in my previous video, can I buy bikini briefs? You can buy underwear. So there you go. Avert your eyes if nudity disturbs you. There you go. All right, so bikini briefs. So in South Africa, can I buy boxers or briefs? I'll have to ask Mr. Patel, Minister Patel, and his great guidance on what we can and cannot do in South Africa these days. Let's see. So William says, how many times is Cyril going to tell us to wash our hands? And go, oh my gosh. You know, that's what parenting is for. Did somebody miss the boat? I mean, really, that's what parents are for. Parents are supposed to teach their small children to wash their hands frequently and how to wash their hands properly. Do we actually need governments to do this? And I know somebody will say, yeah, absolutely, we do need governments because parents don't do their job. Well, we have schools, and that's reinforcement. Teachers in kindergarten, teachers in the primary school can reinforce the process of properly washing hands, particularly if they discover children who are not washing their hands. Children who come to school with head lice as a consequence of families living in filth and vermin should get special attention. And this is something that you develop these habits as a young child. To have a president, the head of state, have to repeatedly go over his safest mechanism to prevent the spread of coronavirus, other than destroying the livelihoods of South Africans, pushing the unemployment rate up to 70, 80% or more perhaps, his solution is to wash your hands. And he doesn't even show us how. Oh, and wear a mask and wear it properly, but he doesn't mention how you wear it properly. Seriously, why do we need the head of state telling us these simple things? That's what you have a ministry for. Get the Minister of Health out there and let the Minister of Health. But of course, we know that under the ANC, it's all authority rises to the top. So only the top person can shine, which made it all the more shocking to see Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma contradict the president on cigarette sales when South Africa went to level 4. No mention of the cigarette sales or the alcohol ban in this discussion, just more of the same. We are, of course, a consultative government, transparent. Smoking crack, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, apparently crack is legal in South Africa, certainly in Pretoria, in the neighborhood where the presidential palace is located at. The New Dawn, which is, of course, the name of the current presidential residence, which used to be Liberitas from Liberty. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Francois Joubert says he needs some speech lessons. No, Francois, I disagree. I disagree entirely with you. I think that President Cyril Ramaphosa is well qualified to get an appearance in a Doctor Who series playing the role of a Dalek. We are, of course, consultative. We are transparent. We have taken steps to protect South Africa. It is the return of the Daleks in South Africa. In fact, that would be a cool episode. A whole season, a whole thread. Now they've got a female doctor. I mean, if you can have a female doctor, you can have anything, right? So why not take the female doctor and have her appear in South Africa instead of Wales? I'm sick of seeing Wales on Doctor Who, and have the return of the Daleks coming from deep within the gold mines, up the diamond pipes. They found a new diamond pipe near Kimberley, and deep inside were buried a whole different subrace of Daleks populated by people who look like Cyril Ramaphosa. Oh gosh. And Just to Go says, I'm impressed. So many words without saying anything. Well, that's what good politicians can do. I lost a whole bunch of people. I must not like that Doctor Who reference there. Yeah. So yeah, a whole lot of saying a whole lot of things, a whole lot of words without actually saying anything. William says, first it was 21 days, then it was 35 days, that's definite. And now, what did he even say? All I heard was a repeat. No, I heard him say that by the end of the year, they hope to be down to level 3. If I heard, I'm not sure I heard that correctly because it's just the words were just coming out. Rian says he's worse than Chucky. Yeah, well, at least Chucky is entertaining. Jane says, and the rise of spouse abuse is because the men can't buy alcohol and the cigarettes, which is frustrating. Well, absolutely, Jane. But another piece here, and this, some people may find this untasteful, but it does need to be talked about. And I know that in polite society, we don't like to talk about this anywhere, but particularly in Southern Africa, it's not just spousal abuse and gender-based violence. It's molestation. It's incest. Think of the number of perverted parents, fathers in particular, who are now molesting their daughters. Think about this. No one wants to think about it. No one wants to talk about it. It's the unspoken topic, but we know it's pervasive. It's very pervasive. And now these parents have access to these children 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no external viewing of what's happening in their homes. So my point here is that it's beyond spousal abuse, it's beyond social isolation, it's beyond mental health issues. All of that plays a role, and all of that is a serious concern in the midst of the lockdown. Extending the lockdown simply exacerbates those conditions. And so the question always becomes, my counterfactual for Cyril is, okay, you've limited the spread of COVID-19, and I can accept that from a scientific perspective, and even with some data, if you support it, I believe that to be true. But at what cost? How many people are dead or suffered because you've stopped the virus? And if you had taken a model, say like the Swedish model, which I'm not recommending, I'm just suggesting, say you've taken that approach, how many more people would have died? You have to balance that against the damage, the catastrophe you've created by locking down the economy. I mean, that's the real question here. And that's the question that's not being asked by government officials or even discussed. And anytime that any reasonable, cogent person in Australia, in South Africa, in the UK, the United States, Japan, well, not so much Japan, but in these westernized countries, when these people ask questions like me, or say Ronaldo, or Ramon, or here in the US, a host of people like Tucker Carlson and others raise these genuine, legitimate questions and pointing out all the things the government has told us about the virus that have proven to be wrong based on scientific information, data, not based on their hysterical reactions. When we question this, not even encouraging people to disbehave civilly, not encouraging civil disobedience, just questioning the authorities, the trolls, the leftist hacks, and government officials attack people. Look at the way that bozo and that host attacked Gareth Cliff, accusing him of his white privilege and what is he talking about, the very people he's trying to speak for. And the people saying that were living in great privilege and great, anyway. So it's just, no, the demonization of opponents is what's scary. Now here, ladies and gentlemen, on Sunday's program, Ronaldo hosts, I will be on again. We will be talking this time, and we will not get distracted by other interesting topics, but we are going to talk about expropriation without compensation. And in that discussion, I will make the very pointed comment that expropriation is not simply about land, ladies and gentlemen. You're wondering how the ANC is going to pay for this catastrophe, where the money is going to come from? Well, if expropriation without compensation passes in the parliament, look to see money taken out of your retirement accounts, out of your pensions, out of your brokerage accounts, out of your savings, because that is property. And that is what is already allowed by the government under Section 25 of the current Constitution from 1996, in effect since 1997 in South Africa. The government can take your property today, but they must compensate you. So if they take $10,000 or 10,000 Rand of stock in Old Mutual, they have to give you compensation 10,000. So there's nothing to gain there. But when they expropriate your land and pay for it, they can give it to people and they can get something. I suppose they can take your assets and get something from it. They're more likely to steal it themselves. So anyway, yeah, but it's very distressing. Anyone who speaks out against this nonsense is painted as a right wing. Here in the United States, if you say anything against the lockdown, you are a racist, misogynist, homophobic, MAGA wearing, hat wearing Trump supporter who, clings to your God and your guns. I'm embellishing, but this is how people are painted. Meantime, the elites who run around and chastise others, like, I don't know, say Chris Cuomo, who violated the lockdown procedures in New York and got himself infected with COVID-19. Yeah, famously, the brother of the governor of the New York state of New York and a host on television there, CBS, I think he's on. Anyway, Chris Cuomo. Yeah, people like that get themselves infected and sick, and they preach to us about our questioning the things that governments tell us. Let me catch up on the comments here. I don't want to forget you guys are taking the time to write things, so let me get on here. So, yeah, I addressed Williams and Rion, Jane. Yeah, Jane, the spouse. Okay, Francois Joubert. Chris White pointed out a random country on that map behind you and tell us something. You want me to point out a random country? Okay, I'll come back. I'll do that right now. Okay, I'll pick a random country. I like that, Francois. So we're playing a game. Let me see. I will turn around and just pick a country in Africa, and then I'll discuss it and see if I know about it. Okay, let's see. Let's see. What are we going to pick here? Let's go with Tanzania. All right, that's a random country, right? Let's talk about Tanzania. So Tanzania is the only country in the world whose official language is Kiswahili or Swahili. Now, Tanzania was originally, in modern history, a German colony known as Tanganyika. And I will refer to the map again just to make a distinction. Tanganyika was more than just Tanzania today and less than Tanzania today. Let me explain. So you see Rwanda and Burundi right here. Probably can't see very well with my finger. But those two were part of the Tanganyika territory, which was controlled by the German Empire. Zanzibar, which is off the coast here, an island, was a sultanate, and it was not part of this. It was separate, and it was influenced by the British, but it was a sultanate. So Tanganyika was the territory the Germans colonized. Now, the Germans introduced a system of education, and German missionaries had been there for decades before it became a German colony. One of the reasons why it became a German colony, because they already had some influence there. So what happened in Tanganyika is the Germans arrived in the 19th century as missionaries. They learned to speak Swahili, and the language was not written down. There was no alphabet, nothing. Fortunately, German is a phonetic language, which means, of course, that the way the words are spelled is the way they're pronounced consistently. So the German missionaries were the first to write down Swahili. So it uses the Roman alphabet, minus the umlauts that the Germans have, but it uses the Roman alphabet, the standard one we use in English. That's why Swahili is written in that alphabet, because the Germans used it, or they were the first to write it down. Then the German government came, and after 1885 and the Berlin Conference, it fell under German control as a German colony, and that lasted until the end of the First World War. During the First World War, or before the First World War, at the turn of the 20th century, there was a rebellion there called the Maji Maji Rebellion, which was indigenous groups that were upset with German rule, and it was a brutal rebellion that was brutally suppressed by the German colonial authorities, or the Schutztruppe, the protection troops, the colonial forces, which were comprised largely of white German officers and NCOs and black African troops, although there were some black NCOs as well. So when the First World War rolled around in Tanganyika, the British Commonwealth sent troops to East Africa to a place called Tanga. And Tanga is located right there just below the Kenyan border in the northeastern corner of Tanzania today. The British landed a force there, but what happened is the governor of the German colony, Heinrich Snow, funny for a guy to be in East Africa along the equator, and his name is Schnee. But anyway, Heinrich Schnee was the governor, and he said that we will surrender. But he received no orders from Berlin to surrender the colony to the British Commonwealth. So he agreed to surrender, but the colony was full of farmers who had big plantations and colonial officials and businessmen, merchants and such, almost every one of whom was a reservist in the German military. So what happened was he said surrender. The commander of the Schutztruppe in East Africa in Tanganyika was Lieutenant Colonel Paul Leto von Vorbeck, a Prussian aristocrat who had seen action in the Boxer Rebellion in China. He'd been in Southwest Africa previously. He was very experienced in the colonies. He said, no, I have not received an order from the War Ministry from Berlin telling me to surrender. My mission is to defend the territory. So he mobilized the German reservists, and he marched them and his African troops up to Tanga, and they fought a battle which was primarily conducted by a few English, UK troops, white troops, but I make the distinction white just for Indian. Indians are also white, but anyway, just for simplicity. And the majority of the forces were actually Indian that were landed at Tanga. Well, the Germans wiped them out. Now, the problem is that they lost a fair number of their German officers and their troops. a higher number of casualties than they were able to sustain on a long-term basis. So they captured tons of material, machine guns, rifles, pistols, rounds for artillery mortars, and the Indians and Brits scurried away. So Tanga was a major victory for the German colonial forces, but Leto von Vorbeck realized that this was not going to be the way that they could fight this war. So he decided to undertake the first modern guerrilla campaign and successfully fought a guerrilla campaign, which saw him and his Schutztruppe travel all over East Africa. So they went down into Mozambique at one point, over into what is now Zambia, northern Rhodesia, and eventually back and forth. At the end of the war in 1918, when the Germans agreed to an armistice to end the conflict, he was told this by Belgian troops in the Belgian Congo. He got a messenger, and he didn't believe it. So what happened is they brought him the actual telegram that came from the Kaiser, and he agreed to surrender. He returned to Germany, and although Germany was defeated, Leto von Vorbeck became a hero. He was later promoted to general, or he was promoted to general while he was in Africa and didn't know about it, and he retired. During the 1930s, Leto von Vorbeck, the Nazis courted him extensively because he was a very popular figure in Germany, one of the few popular figures from the First World War because of the great success. At one point, Leto von Vorbeck's forces of never more than 2,500 troops after they went to guerrilla tactics all over East Africa tied down over 500,000 Commonwealth troops, including Jan Christian Smuts and troops from South Africa and Indian troops and troops from the UK, troops that were desperately needed on the Western Front and might have ended the First World War far sooner had they not been tied down in East Africa, chasing Leto von Vorbeck and his small group of Askaris. So what happened is that this group, what they did is they fought off everyone with guerrilla tactics. They made shoes out of old tires. They cut them out of that. Leto von Vorbeck was famous and respected immensely by his troops because he lived under the same conditions as soldiers, not some aristocrat in a little pitch tent being brought tea and biscuits and scone in the midst of a guerrilla campaign. No, he lived in the bush on the ground, and he ate the same food and lived in the same conditions and got malaria just as often as his troops did. So he was immensely respected for this, and he was also incredibly popular in Germany. Well, in the 1930s, 20 years after the war ended, I got ahead. So the Nazis tried to get him to come in. They offered him a full general position in the Wehrmacht if he would enter after 1933. Well, he detested the Nazis, and he detested them with a passion that's reserved for few others on this planet. So he refused, and he did not re-enter the German military. So they made an effort to marginalize him in German society. But in the late 1930s, 20 years after the First World War was over, he returned to Dar es Salaam to a hero's welcome. The surviving veterans of the campaign and many Tanzanians or Tanganyikans came to Dar es Salaam to see the parade, to cheer on and say hello to their old commander. Paul Leto von Vorbeck, an amazing figure in history and guerrilla warfare. Quite an amazing figure. So Tanganyika goes from becoming a British colonial territory, being divided into Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanganyika, those three. Tanganyika is British, Rwanda and Burundi fall under Belgian responsibility, and the histories diverge from there after the First World War. Then after the Second World War, in the 1960s, Tanganyika becomes the Republic, and it's gone now from British colonial control in the early 1960s. And what happens is that it merges with Zanzibar and becomes Tanzania, or Tanzania, as a lot of Africans like to say. So that's in the 1960s. It started out with a socialist under Julius Nyerere, a socialist government intent on collectivization and the sharing of things. And it is the perfect example to prove that socialism simply does not work. Nyerere tried this for many years. It was an abject failure. Tanzania fell backwards economically and was a laggard for decades. Eventually, shortly before he left office, he finally gave up the reins of power. He admitted that it was the wrong path and that Tanzania should take a different path. Slowly, it moved towards a market economy, capitalist-based, and Tanzania's economy started taking off in the 1990s, the aught decade, and until recently, under its current president, who's now looking at nationalizing the mines and interceding and controlling things. Until then, it was on a good path, Tanzania. So that's Tanzania. That's a random country from the map, and I've discussed that there's more to talk about, but let me get to people's comments and questions. Right, or did I miss anything? So let me see. Oh, I missed a bunch here. Sorry, folks. Sorry about that. I was asked a question, and you got to be careful when you ask me these things. I can go on forever about some of these things. So where's the random country here? I'm trying to get back to the comments. Oh my goodness. Oh, that was Francois. So William says, after Francois says, Chris, let me reiterate, while it may be sad that people have lost their lives from the virus,